Hi, everyone. I'm Binny, and we have today with us Karthik. Welcome to Project Pro's industry podcast. This specific one focusing on industry enterprise adoption of Gen AI and LLMs. We have with us Karthik today. Karthik has over 20 years experience in data analytics, data science, machine learning, and more recently, Gen AI. Karthik has a master's and PhD in scientific computing from the University of Michigan, and currently is a founder of a company, Gaiti, which basically works with enterprises in AI transformation of their processes. Karthik, thanks for taking time to do this.
Thanks, Benny. That's my honor to be here with you. Looking forward for the discussion.
Awesome. Karthik, maybe to begin with, since you are out there talking to lots of companies, helping them with their AI transformations,
Mhm.
there's a general perception that Gen AI is a magic wand which can show up and just transform and make companies all efficient. How much of that magic wand actually works? How much of that is yet to come? It'll be very helpful to get your perspective on that.
Sure. That's, I think, a great question to start off or kick off the discussion with. So, yes, like you said, there is a lot of perception that yeah, Gen AI use cases or LLMs or anything generative AI is a magic wand. And I would not blame, but would blame the marketing strategies of these Gen AI companies as being a part of the problem, right? Because for example, this is not restricted to the example I'm going to give, but I'm going to give the example of ChatGPT. ChatGPT came up March 2023, and everyone lost their mind, right? Because the demos were like out of the world. They were brilliant. And every company started getting on the bandwagon of we need to get Gen AI, we need to get ChatGPT into all of our use cases because it was advertised as solution to everything. But as people started working on it, as people started trying to use it in their own use cases, it was clear that it was good, but in a very restrictive space, right? It's a language model. As a language model, you can use it only in specific use cases. So you can use it to crunch a lot of data that is being generated in your enterprise in the form of language. For example, you have a knowledge database. You want to query the knowledge database. Yes, you can do it. But companies wanted to start using it for, let's say, regression problems, the classification problems. They have a bunch of data sets with which needs a multi-class classification algorithm, and they started using like ChatGPT to classify multi-class classification problems. And they started approaching experts were like, okay, we have a classification problem, we want to use ChatGPT for it, which is not possible, right? So a lot of enterprises started doing that. They wanted to use ChatGPT as a one-stop solution for everything because mainly because of a lack of education about what exactly AI is, what exactly Gen AI is. So it started getting to be kind of like a elusive magic wand that was not clear, that was not intentional for these enterprises. So that's one of the main focus areas that as experts we want to help enterprises do, right? So what exactly are the use cases for which you have to use Gen AI? What exactly are the use cases where Gen AI will be helpful? So the first, so it's been like a popular thing, right? If you don't understand the problem, you cannot create a solution. So as a first step, I think the main focus area for any enterprise should be to actually understand the problem in hand and not just jump into Gen AI as like a one-stop solution for everything.
Makes sense. Yeah. And as you see enterprises deploying Gen AI, what category of problems? I guess all of us heard about the customer support, chat, that where GenAI seems to do fairly well. But
Mhm.
other than that, what category of problems are you seeing a lot of ROI from?
Mm, Great question. So a lot of success cases
Mm,
that we have been seeing when we
mm,
work on AI transformation with enterprises, a lot of them have successfully deployed GenAI use cases in knowledge retrieval.
mhm,
So this used to be referred to as information retrieval back in the
mhm,
days,
mhm,
in early 2000s or 2010s. Information retrieval was a huge thing, and there was not much success back then with
mhm,
information retrieval. It was like it was good, but not as amazing as what we can do with
mhm,
OpenAI or GenAI use cases right now.
mhm, mhm,
So what I mean by information retrieval or knowledge retrieval is, for example, you have a knowledge database of, let's say, a company's FAQs, a
mhm,
huge Fortune 500 company which has like FAQs in the thousands.
mhm.
Um, you kind of like have an interactive chatbot. That's what everyone has right now as a use case, right?
Yeah.
So you just ask questions just like you would with, say, let's say ChatGPT or a Llama model, right?
Yeah.
So that is one of the most popular use cases we have seen. We consulted with one of the Fortune 500 companies a couple of months ago to help
Mhm,
with their AI transformation,
mhm,
where they wanted to cut down the help desk. The help
mhm,
desk, internal help desk, consisted of around 200 humans,
mhm,
and they wanted to cut down on that number of humans to use kind of like uh, a language model
mhm.
instead of humans.
Yeah.
So we consulted with them to provide that AI transformation. So
Mhm,
that was one success use case that I have personally worked on.
mhm,
And then another use case has been with this huge law firm that we worked with. So law firms do a ton of drafting for their um, court cases, for their for everything that they have to
yeah.
file in the courts, right? So those are kind of uh, rigorous, and
Mm,
each of these filings run into hundreds of pages. The
mhm.
smallest filing would be like 120 pages or so. So
Okay.
it takes a lot of time to do that, and it takes a lot of judicial interns or judicial clerks to do that filing, and it takes many weeks for each filing.
Yeah.
So that is one use case that law firms are rushing to adopt.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
this law firm that we consulted with, they adopted it, and their speed of filing increased like crazy. They were able to do their filings in less than 2 days,
Mhm. Wow.
and
Wow.
using just two people. So
Mhm,
two people to draft it, one person to just QC it. And 2 days their filing papers were done. So that's
mhm,
another use case that we have worked with, that's being adopted at a breakneck speed. Then
mhm,
there are the shipping companies that are using uh, Gen AI use cases extensively. So
mhm,
in shipping, you have a ton of um, tracking and compliance and regulations. So you have a bunch of regulatory frameworks that you need to comply with based on
mhm,
like where you're shipping, what you're shipping, and how much you're shipping and everything. You'll have to
mhm,
file a bunch of compliance papers at each port that you sail through, or each port that you land at, or each port that you um, like unload at.
yeah.
So every 2 days you'll have to be generating like paperwork over paperwork over paperwork.
Mm,
So the current system is that people who are sitting at a central office, they
mhm,
keep sending these papers over to you
yeah.
on ship, so you can hand it to the ports like whenever you
Mhm,
arrive. It's an extremely time consuming process.
mhm,
So this company that we consulted with, they set up a system in the ships,
mhm,
so the captains can generate the required paperwork as and when they can they want.
Mhm.
So that is another use case that's been successful. So all of these successes that we have seen are in
Yeah.
industries that you would not have traditionally thought of as
Mhm.
being success use cases of Gen AI, right? So, but ironically, the
Mhm.
industries in which we have not seen successful adoption
Mhm.
are the industries which we would have ideally thought, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer. This is going to
Mhm.
be a success use case, right? So, for example, IT industry has the least success in terms of um, Gen AI adoption.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the only success that we have seen is basically knowledge retrieval for help desks. That is the
Mhm.
only success stories that we have seen so far. Otherwise, we have not seen many success in traditional IT industries.
Mhm.
So I think it's the non-traditional industries which have been adopting and finding great success with Gen AI.
It's very interesting. And when you say the IT industry, you're seeing kind of less than expected success. I was just curious, what kind of use case success were you hoping to see in the IT industry? Is it more complex code generation, lesser time to build projects because of the code generation LLMs? Is that the kind of success you were looking to see, or was it some other use cases you had in mind?
That yes,
Ah,
to kind of have a copilot or
mm,
code generation. So we were hoping to see that, but I'll first answer that question of why we didn't see that, right?
yeah, yeah.
So we didn't see that because we quickly realized, or rather the IT companies, they quickly realized that copilots or all of these code generation algorithms,
Hmm.
or rather code generation use cases,
Hmm.
they were generating codes that were in the training database,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So the codes were kind of very similar to already deployed code or codes that were um, that you would, let's say, ideally not make part of your own code base.
Hmm.
So it's less than ideal for companies to use those at this point, especially if they're huge companies like say Fortune 500 companies, right?
Yeah.
They will not want to risk compliance. They will not want to risk stealing, quote unquote, stealing another company's code base, right?
Hmm.
So they have been very apprehensive of
Hmm.
using such a tool without proper regulatory frameworks within
Hmm.
their company internally.
Hmm.
So we have not seen adoption with large companies, at least.
Hmm.
For code generation. The other kind of use cases that we have been wanting to see
Hmm.
are kind of how can employees benefit from it, right?
Hmm.
How can so um, the help desks
Hmm.
for IT companies are huge.
Hmm.
They like Fortune 500 companies. They have like hundreds of employees just helping people within the company on talent related queries, HR queries, and like payroll related stuff, and so on and so forth. Right? Like there
Hmm.
are tons of people just working internally to help these companies, right?
Hmm.
But help these employees. So the use cases that we were looking for is essentially just to reduce the number of people on the help desk, right? To provide an individualized help desk for each employee. So if an
Hmm.
employee has questions with their HR policies, if they have questions about their payroll, about their insurance or whatever, they could
Yeah.
interact with a Gen AI based model and get their answers. So
Hmm.
we were looking for more success in that kind of a situation. But
Yeah.
it's ironically very, very few companies that have actually found success with it.
Hmm.
And funny enough, that the reason that people have not been finding success enough with it is because they don't have a database that is in a trainable state
Hmm.
for these models. They
Hmm.
have extremely disparate data sets that is not in a position to train these models.
Hmm.
And these models are also, even though they look good on the
Hmm.
surface,
Hmm.
in actual practice, they need a lot of tuning. They need a
Hmm.
lot of expert tuning to make them usable.
Yeah.
So you cannot use it off the shelf.
Yeah.
They're good for very, very, very specific use cases, but
Hmm.
unless you have the specific data set and the know-how and the skill sets to apply that know-how,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to get a good result out of that training.
Okay.
So I think that's one of the major reasons why IT companies have not had good success
Okay.
adopting this.
Okay. So that's an interesting point, Karthik. Just to double click on that last point you made about data not being in a cohesive place to train these LLMs, right? Just to
Mhm.
understand that slightly more, do you mean something like, let's say, one of the IT services companies or wanted to train for a customer support use case? Maybe all of their knowledge management is inside a Confluence or a SharePoint, and there is no way to take all of that and train the model. Well, is that one example of that, or other complexities to that?
Yeah, that's actually one of the good points, whatever you mentioned, them having
Hmm.
all of the data sets in a Confluence or in
Hmm.
a centralized database.
Hmm.
So they can have it, but the problem is they do not have it. Most of the companies, believe it or not. So we
Hmm.
tried consulting with a company which was trying to do exactly this, right? So they gave
Yeah.
us a data dump of their Confluence.
Hmm.
It turns out that they don't have all of it on a single Confluence. They have it
Hmm.
in so many disparate Confluences,
Yeah.
and but then they told us we need to automate this and this
Hmm.
specific number of things, but we were not able to find a match between each of these and their Confluence dumps. And
Yeah.
then we went digging in, and turns out that they have different sets of Confluence pages. I'm using Confluence because you said it,
Yeah.
but they
Sure.
had it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But they had different sets of these databases in different spaces, right? So it was almost impossible to hunt it down as to where they have what.
Hmm.
And even if we found out where they had it,
Hmm.
they didn't have like 100% of it in that
Yeah.
particular place, right?
Hmm.
So we were able to find maybe like 70 to 80% of the database that we
Hmm.
required to train their models.
Yeah.
So we did set up something up for them, but that was not sufficient. So they were not able to find success in the way that they wanted to
Hmm.
find.
Yeah.
So, and that's purely because they were not able to track down their data sets to be able to train these models.
Understood. So, in that case, Karthik, to see, mm, how should I say, more enterprise adoption of LLM use cases. So,
Mhm.
do you think, apart from just seeing progression in newer and newer GPT versions and more open source LLMs,
Mm.
there's going to be a lot of tooling. For example, in this case, some kind of a LLM data catalog almost
Mhm.
that's going to come up before we see proper enterprise adoption of GenAI?
Yes, exactly. Uh, I
Okay.
think I think at this point, of course, we are seeing rapid development in Gen AI algorithms, especially
Mhm.
the transformer algorithms, GPTs, and
Yeah.
whatnot. But
Mhm.
before that, I think to find success, especially in large enterprises, which are, face it or not, or like it or not, the companies that are the targets of these models, of these large
Mhm.
language models, are huge enterprises, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Huge enterprises are basically the target market. The end customer, like individual private parties, are just appendage
Yeah.
in the whole scheme of things. So the main roadblock for enterprise adoption is data transformation, data governance.
Mm.
That is the roadblock that is standing between the end user and these
Mhm.
amazing models. These models are in a state which are like kind of already good enough for enterprise adoption. They are in like state of the art, and there are rapid developments, yes, but even the current state of the art is sufficient enough for most of the use cases that enterprises are looking for.
Mhm. Mhm.
So data governance is the main roadblock here.
Mhm.
And what we mean by data governance is how is an organization governing its data, as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And by governing, we mean where are they storing this data? Is there a central catalog of this data? Is there a
Mm-hmm.
data dictionary, so to say?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to handle security of this data? What happens if there is data leak? What happens if someone steals something of the data? What happens if there is a leak of personal identifiable information or personal credit
Yeah.
information or anything, right? So because that's important to wonder about PCI, PII, that's personal identifiable
Yeah.
information, personal credit information. That's important for it because these language models, some of them are completely open source, some of them are closed. And when you have an open source data, it means that whatever you're feeding into it is being sent to the cloud of the model, right? So which
Mm-hmm.
means that the next version of the LLM is going to have the PII, PCI data that you fed into it.
Yeah.
So do you
Mm-hmm.
want some customers' credit card information to be available to like billions of users when they are
Yeah.
querying the model? So
Mm-hmm.
those kind of data governance strategies are extremely important. And that's one of the main things that we focus on Gaiti as well, to help companies govern their data, to help them with data governance and data transformations. So
Mm-hmm.
when these large enterprises handle that part of the roadblock
Mm-hmm.
of how, if they have data governance and if they don't have data governance, how should they travel towards having a good data governance framework,
Yeah.
then is when enterprise level adoption of ChatGPT or language models or LLMs would be a success.
Okay. Okay. That's very well said. And maybe in this context, it'd be helpful to understand, since you earlier mentioned both open source and OpenAI, right? For
Mhm.
for a given use case, how do you at Gaiti or enterprises differentiate or decide? Are you going to go with a managed service like OpenAI, or are you going to go with something open source like Llama? Or like, how do you decide on that?
Great question. So I think the main point that we look for is
Mm,
what the client wants, right?
mm,
So one of the major pain points that we usually have is that the client wants a magic wand.
mm,
And usually that's fine. That's totally fine because the client is, they're looking to solve a problem. And if that problem can be solved with a magic wand, why wouldn't they want that, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's for us to break down what they want and
Mm,
decide what we want to go with.
mm,
So most of the times, large enterprises. So there is a huge difference between how you would handle things for a large enterprise and how you would handle things for a smaller company, right?
yeah.
So for large enterprises, the problem is that they have a large legal team present there monitoring every word that is transmitted through electronic means.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those cases, you want to be extremely careful about what is being sent out, what is being fed in, right? So
Yeah.
what I mean by what is being sent out is if you're training a language model,
Mm-hmm.
is that model consuming that information on
Mm-hmm.
premises, or
Mm-hmm.
is it sending it out to a cloud which can be used by that model for a later iteration of its own improvement? So with large enterprises, we almost always stick to on-prem custom models.
Mm-hmm.
We would always stick to models that are not sent out of the premises.
Yeah.
So mainly to deal with all these legal issues and all the other compliance and regulatory requirements internally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But for small enterprises, it's much more relaxed, right? So you have the ability to be flexible with what model you want or what kind of model you can choose from. So
Mm-hmm.
more often than not, it's probably just easier to
Yeah.
use a open source model with
Mm-hmm.
small enterprises, mainly because they don't have that level of security requirements yet, because they have not generated their own data. They're
Mm-hmm.
usually using data from outside sources, which they've either bought or are already open source. So
Yeah.
it's fine to just use custom models, which
Yeah.
have flexibility in that case. So it again boils down to regulatory and compliance requirements. am I compliant with the regulatory frameworks of
Yeah.
the enterprise that I'm dealing with?
Hmm.
That's the bottom line. In one line, if I have to sum up the solution that I'm looking for, that's pretty much what I would go to. And the main reason is because there are what, like about 200 transformer models at this point.
Hmm.
And if you try to find the difference between each of these transformer models, it's kind of like they're all like maybe 1% different from each other. The
Hmm.
base gene data pool of each of these species of transformers are pretty much the same.
Hmm.
They just like different in like extremely tiny
Yeah.
components.
Hmm. Makes sense. So, so once a company has bought into this vision for Gen AI, they've identified a use case, they've figured
Mhm.
out compliance, data governance, and managed services open source. How do they start building out these use cases? Meaning, which team gets tasked with this? Is this the traditional data science team? Does IT get involved? Where does Gaiti fit into all this? It'll be very helpful to understand this.
Mhm. So I think there are three questions in that statement. I would assume so. If I'm understanding it correctly. So
Mhm.
who builds this? That's the first question, right? So there are different phases through which companies go through when they
Mhm.
think of Gen AI or AI adoption.
Mhm.
So I'm specifically talking about Gen AI adoption here, right? Because AI is an extremely broad
Yep.
statement. So I'll just ignore that for now
Sure.
and just focus on Gen AI based
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
So, which teams implement Gen AI? So, right now, the phases through which the companies go through for Gen AI adoption
Mhm.
is internal. So, they
Mhm.
try to do things internally.
Mhm.
And that's most often from what we have seen at Gaiti. Most often, companies try using their internal data science team and machine learning professionals who they have internally
Mhm.
to do their prototyping, to kind of do a evaluation of feasibility. Um, so that's where it starts. And most often, the data scientists or machine learning professionals, the conventional ones, they're extremely good with theoretical evaluation and also prototyping.
Mhm.
And prototypes usually cannot be deployed. And that's where the implementation team comes in, which are
Mhm.
the traditional software engineers and the traditional IT folks who are
Yeah.
taking care of the architecture and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So conversion of the prototyping into implementable algorithms,
Mhm.
that's done by the software engineers, the conventional ones.
Mhm.
So basically taking all the prototypes that the initial team builds and converting them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the large enterprises, they have no problems doing all of
Mhm.
these things, right?
Mhm.
They have large teams of people. Someone or another in the whole enterprise is able to do any of these things.
Yeah.
So they handle it internally. And
Mhm.
smaller companies, they
Mhm.
unfortunately would either have people for prototyping, and they might not have people for conversion of prototypes into implementable models. So they
Yeah.
would probably hire people from outside.
Mhm.
Or the other way around, they would have conventional or traditional software engineers who are not familiar with prototyping of these Gen AI models or any AI models for that matter. So they will
Mhm.
want to consult outside, bring
Mhm.
people from outside for that.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the first two questions, right? Who builds these Gen AI models and who implements it?
Yeah.
And where does Gaiti come in? Gaiti is Gaiti comes in multiple phases, right?
Mhm.
So the first phase is kind of even evaluating if your enterprise even needs Gen AI.
Mhm.
So a lot of times they might not even need Gen AI, right? They
Mhm.
might just need an AI framework, AI strategy framework that they need to have,
Mhm.
or an AI governance framework that they need to have
Mhm.
to handle all their AI needs. They
Mhm.
don't need Gen AI per se. They just need machine learning algorithms or machine learning frameworks that they can operate within.
Hmm.
So Gaiti does that assessment. Do you even need a GenAI transformation or a GenAI implementation within your firm
Yeah.
to find success? So
Hmm.
once we find it, if they need GenAI based solutions, we would provide them with an assessment of which teams they should be going with. Should they be going with internal teams or should they be going with a mix of internal and external teams?
Hmm.
And once they do that, then we provide them with a kind of a AI regulatory and compliance and risk framework.
Hmm.
So an analogy that I usually use for this as to what exactly Gaiti does,
Yeah.
because it's very difficult to explain it in very abstract terms. I'm going to use an analogy. So think of a busy intersection, right? You're getting vehicles from all four sides. You have multiple ways of regulating this traffic
Hmm.
coming from all four sides. You could either have like a traffic policeman stand in the middle of the road and just direct people around. It's not the most efficient, but it kind of works. But until something breaks down right in the
Hmm.
middle of the, or you could just put in a roundabout and you can just trust the best judgment of people who are driving to just respect the rules of the roundabout and
Hmm.
go in circles without any issues.
Yeah.
Or the most efficient way is to just put a traffic light in the middle of the intersection and then expect people to obey the traffic lights, right? So, but then not everyone on the roads is going to be sane or traffic compliant. Someone someday is going to just go crash in the middle of the road, and
Yeah.
that's when all the troubles come in, right? So when they crash in, you need to have like 911 teams on standby. You need to have policemen come and you need to have paramedics. You need to have EMTs, ambulances. Everything should be on the spot within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And they usually are.
Hmm.
So now, think about it. These cars, the different cars, or the different Gen AI or AI based algorithms that go on in these companies, and they're going on smoothly. It's not, you won't find any problems with them usually. Like 99% of the times, you don't need to regulate it, you don't need to do anything. But let's just think about a case where one of these models end up like leaking out information, not because it's like the model is sentient or whatever. It just happens. Like data leaks happen all the time. Someone in your company or someone goes rogue and they leak some
Hmm.
model parameters or some model information out in the open.
Yeah.
So there is a data leak, or there is
Hmm.
a data breach, or there is some risk compliance issue happening there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is equivalent to having a crash, right? So
Hmm.
if that happens, do you have the framework for
Hmm.
handling it in the next 10 minutes? Do
Hmm.
you have everything in place to contain that leak? Do you have
Hmm.
everything in place to contain that regulatory requirements? Can you satisfy all the regulatory requirements? Say, for example, an insurance firm faces this, you're going to have to report to like 84 different governmental bodies. I'm not even
Hmm.
making up that number. So
Hmm.
if something goes wrong, you have to report to like almost 100 government bodies,
Hmm.
and the reporting requirements are extremely specific. So is your company like prepared for
Yeah.
that?
Got
And
it.
these regulatory requirements are very, very specific, right?
Hmm.
And you have to report about the technical details of the models, what went into the training of these models, the
Hmm.
parameters and everything. So that's only one of the items,
Hmm.
right? So there are multiple other things like that. So
Yeah.
what is the storage
Hmm.
facilities that you have on-prem? What is the storage facility you have on cloud? How is the on-prem devices communicating with the cloud
Hmm.
devices? So what are the networking and what are the frameworks that you have
Yeah.
on hand?
Hmm.
And what are the security requirements that are being satisfied by your enterprise
Hmm.
for making sure that you don't have any of these hypothetical crashes that might happen. So
Yeah.
Gaiti goes in, assesses all of these things,
Hmm.
and helps them set these things up.
Got it.
So it's kind of like strategy and AI transformation of these large enterprises.
Hmm. Hmm. Great, great. That's very helpful to know. Thanks for sharing that. On that note, thank you so much for taking time to do this. This has been terrific. A ton of value hearing everything that you said. Thank you.
Thanks, Binny. Same here. Had a good time chatting. It was enjoyable.
Thanks. Thank you.